Mom kicked me out for refusing to share my college fund with my step-sibling. So I'm 17, and I live with my mom, she's 43, her husband, my stepdad, and his two kids, Ryan and Emma. Ryan's a year older than me, and Emma's 2 years younger. We all go to the same high school, but that doesn't mean we actually hang out or anything. Like, we know each other's friends, but that's about it. My mom and stepdad have been married for 3 years now, but we've been living together for 6, ever since my mom decided she was serious about him. When we first moved in with them, I really thought it was going to be like one of those big happy family situations. Like I'd have siblings now, and we'd all hang out and do family stuff together. But that didn't really happen. Honestly, I should have seen it coming from the start, but I guess I was too hopeful. Or maybe I just didn't want to admit that things wouldn't be all sunshine and rainbows. See, before my mom met my stepdad, it was just me and her. My dad passed away when I was really little, too little to remember anything about him. The only thing I know is from what my mom told me, and she's always been a little vague about him. She said they never got married because his family didn't like her much, which she blamed on them being stuck up. But I don't know. I was too young to know what really went down. Anyway, before he passed, my dad set up a college fund for me. I don't know how he managed to do it with how sick he was, but he did. His lawyer told me about it when I was old enough to understand, and I guess it's been this one thing that I've always had in the back of my mind. Like, no matter what happens, at least I've got that. It was set up so that I can't touch it until I turn 18, and my mom can't either. The lawyer controls it until then. So, like I said, it was just me and my mom for a long time. I got used to it, and we were good. She was my whole world, you know? We had this tiny apartment, but it was cozy, and it was just us. But then she met my stepdad when I was 8, and everything started to change. At first, it was slow. She'd go out on dates with him, and I'd stay over at my grandparents' place, my mom's parents, not my dad's. They've never been in the picture. I didn't mind it too much at the time because I figured she deserved to be happy, but then they got more serious. My mom started talking about moving in with him, and that's when things started to feel different. She was so excited, and she'd go on and on about how great he was and how his kids were such good kids and so nice. She kept telling me that I'd finally get siblings, and we'd be one big, happy family. I remember getting excited too, because what kid doesn't want that? When we finally moved into their house, I was trying really hard to be positive. It was a big change. New place, new school, and now I had a stepdad and two step-siblings to adjust to. But I thought it was going to work out if I just put in the effort. I'd try to talk to Ryan and Emma, invite them to play video games or watch movies, and sometimes they'd say yes, but most of the time, they'd just give me these looks like, "Why are you even here?" I'd brush it off at first, telling myself they just needed time to warm up. It was a lot for them too. Some random girl moving into their house and suddenly being told she was their new sister. But months went by, and nothing really changed. We lived together, but it wasn't like we were a family. It felt more like I was a roommate they didn't really want. It wasn't that they were mean or anything, but there was just this vibe, you know? Like they'd sit around the table talking with my stepdad and mom, and I'd be there, but it felt like I wasn't. They'd laugh about inside jokes I didn't get or talk about stuff from before I moved in, and when I'd try to join in, they'd kind of just ignore me. Not in a mean way, just like they didn't really care if I was there or not. And my mom? She didn't seem to notice at all. She was so happy with her new family that she didn't see how I was left out. It was weird seeing her like that, honestly. She'd never been that happy when it was just the two of us. I tried telling myself it was good that she was finally happy, but I started feeling more and more like an outsider. Over time, I just gave up trying. I'd stay in my room or go out with my own friends instead of trying to hang out with them. It felt pointless. My stepdad and his kids were polite enough, but there was this invisible wall between us, and I didn't have the energy to keep trying to break it down. It's like they had their family, and I wasn't really part of it, even if my mom was. What sucked the most was how my mom treated them. She'd go out of her way to make them happy, like cooking their favorite meals, taking them shopping, or making sure their rooms were perfect. Meanwhile, I'd get the leftovers, literally and figuratively. I didn't really say anything about it because what was the point? It wasn't like it'd change anything, but it hurt seeing her care so much about them and not even notice how I felt. When I was younger, I used to think, well, maybe if I try harder, they'll see me as part of the family. But as I got older, I realized that was just wishful thinking. It wasn't going to happen. They had their group, and I was on the outside looking in. And the thing is, I don't even think they did it on purpose. It was just how it was. Even now, I still try to tell myself that maybe I'm just overthinking things, but deep down, I know I'm not. My mom has a new family, and it feels like I'm just a reminder of her past life. It's like she's moved on from the days when it was just the two of us. and she's more focused on making her new family work. I guess I can't blame her for wanting to be happy, but it's tough when you're the one left out. It's been years since we moved in with them, and I've just accepted that things are never going to be the way I hoped. I've stopped trying to fit in, and I focus on my own thing. But there are days when it still gets to me, like when I see my mom laughing with them, and I'm sitting there feeling like I don't belong. I don't know. Maybe it's dumb to feel this way after all these years. Maybe I should just get over it. But it's hard when you're stuck in a house where you don't feel wanted. I guess the only thing that keeps me going is knowing that once I turn 18 and graduate, I'll have my own money, and I can finally get out of here. That college fund my dad left me is probably the one thing that makes me feel like I've got a future that doesn't involve them. Sometimes, when things get really bad, I just think about that. I imagine finally being able to move out, go to college, and live my own life without feeling like an outsider in my own home. All right, so things got a little more real around here when my stepdad's past came back into the picture. I guess it makes sense to explain what I mean by that. See, my stepdad had a whole other life before he met my mom. He was married, and from what I've heard, it wasn't exactly a happy situation. His ex-wife was this real piece of work, basically a gold digger who took him for everything he had, and then some. I didn't know all the details at first, but over the years I started piecing things together. Apparently, she not only drained his bank account, but also left him in a really bad spot with the kids, my stepbrother, Ryan, and my stepsister, Emma. She bailed on them right after the divorce, which is when my stepdad had to rebuild everything from scratch. I think that's why he latched onto my mom so hard. She was like the complete opposite of his ex. No drama, just there to support him, and always doing her best to make things work. It's no wonder why my stepdad and his kids welcomed her with open arms. She was the solution to all their problems. But me? I was just a reminder that she had a past life that didn't fit into their picture-perfect setup. It's like they wanted my mom to be part of their new family. But me? I was the extra baggage that came along for the ride. I'll admit, I wasn't really paying attention to all of this when we first moved in. I was just a kid, and my mind was more on making new friends at school and trying to adjust to a new place. But as I got older, I started noticing the small things, like how my mom and stepdad would talk about their future plans, things like vacations, home improvements, all the usual stuff, but it was always about them and their kids. I was never really part of those conversations. It was like I was there, but not really there, you know? Like, physically I was in the room, but they just kind of talk over me or around me like I was invisible. And honestly, it hurt more than I let on. I kept trying to tell myself it was just how things were, that it wasn't personal, but that got harder and harder over time. The thing is, my mom would never see it. She'd be all smiles, acting like everything was perfect. She'd gush about how lucky she was to have found this wonderful family and how happy she was. And I'd just sit there, watching her play this part that I wasn't invited to. Sometimes I wondered if she was just pretending, like maybe she didn't see how they treated me because she didn't want to. But other times, I felt like she knew exactly what was going on and just didn't care because she was happy. One of the biggest things that bugged me was how different my stepdad and his kids treated my mom compared to how they treated me. With her, they'd go out of their way to include her in everything. Ryan would ask her advice about school projects, and Emma would ask her to go shopping for clothes. They'd all hang out in the living room together, watching movies or cooking dinner like this perfect little unit. But with me, they'd barely say a word. If I walked into a room, it was like I'd turn the lights off. Everyone would just kind of go quiet, and the vibe would get awkward. It's like they didn't know what to do with me. If I tried to join the conversation, they'd nod politely or give these one-word answers until I got the hint that they weren't interested. Eventually, I stopped trying to be part of it. I'd stay up in my room or go to the library after school instead of going home. It was easier to avoid them than to keep feeling like an outsider in my own house. It's a weird feeling, not wanting to go home because it doesn't even feel like home. It's just a place where I sleep and eat, but that's about it. Now you might think, why didn't you say something to your mom? And trust me, I thought about it a lot. But every time I got close to bringing it up, I'd chicken out. It felt like if I said anything, it'd just make me sound jealous or needy, like I couldn't handle my mom being happy without me. And I didn't want to be that person, the one who ruins everything because they can't handle a little change. So I stayed quiet. It got worse when I started hearing more stories about my stepdad's ex-wife. From what I picked up, she was a total nightmare. She not only drained his bank account, but also messed up his relationship with their kids. My stepdad had to work double shifts to pay off debts and support Ryan and Emma after she left. And then my mom came along, and she was like this miracle who saved the day. I think that's why they were so attached to her. She was their fix after years of struggling, and I was just the add-on they didn't ask for. It's like my stepdad and his kids were so relieved to have my mom in their lives that they didn't want to bother with me. And my mom? She was too busy playing the perfect stepmom to notice. I still tried to convince myself that things could change. I'd tell myself that maybe I just needed to give it time, that we'd eventually bond, and things would start to feel like a real family. But the more time passed, the more I realized it wasn't going to happen. My stepdad's kids had already decided that they didn't need another sibling, and my stepdad? Well, he was just happy as long as my mom was happy. One day, I overheard my stepdad talking to his friend in the kitchen. He was going on about how lucky he was to have found someone like my mom, and how his life had completely turned around since they got together. He called her a godsend, and the best thing that ever happened to him. I remember standing there, just out of sight, listening to all this praise he was showering on her, and I kept waiting for him to say something about me, like how it was nice having me around too or anything, really. But he didn't. He didn't mention me once. That's when it hit me hard. I realized that no matter what I did, no matter how much I tried, I was never going to be part of their picture. My mom had made her choice, and I wasn't a priority in that. It was like they had this perfect family dynamic that didn't include me, and they were all perfectly fine with that. I remember walking away from that conversation feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. It was one thing to feel like an outsider, but it was another thing to know that I really was one. It wasn't in my head. It wasn't just my imagination. They had their family, and I was just tagging along. From that point on, I started distancing myself even more. I'd eat dinner later so I didn't have to sit with them, or I'd make up excuses to stay out of the house as much as possible. It was easier that way. I didn't have to pretend everything was fine when it clearly wasn't, but even with all that, I still felt this pressure to act like everything was okay. My mom was so happy with them, and I didn't want to mess that up for her. It was like she finally found what she was looking for, and who was I to ruin that? So I kept quiet, stayed out of their way, and pretended that it didn't bother me as much as it did. But deep down, it was getting harder to ignore the reality that this family my mom was so proud of was one I'd never be part of. And no matter how much I told myself it was okay, it still hurt like hell. All right, so here's where things really start to go south. I'm getting close to graduating, and I've been looking at colleges for a while now. I've always known about the college fund my dad set up for me, so I wasn't too worried about money. I figured with the fund, I could afford to go pretty much anywhere I wanted. Plus, I've been working hard in school and had my eyes set on a scholarship. Basically, I had everything planned out. So one night, my mom calls me into the living room and says she needs to have a serious talk. I can tell from the way she's talking that it's going to be one of those family meetings, but it's just the two of us. She sits me down and starts going on about how expensive college is these days and how, we're all one family and have to support each other. I had no idea where she was going with this at first, but then she drops the bomb. She tells me that my stepdad hasn't been able to save up money for Ryan and Emma's college, and she thinks it'd be only fair if I shared my college fund with them. I just sat there staring at her, like she was speaking a different language or something. I was in shock. This was money my dad set up for me specifically, to make sure I'd be taken care of after he was gone. It's literally the only thing he could give me because he passed away when I was a kid. And now she was telling me to split it with kids who've never treated me like family, and honestly, don't even really like me. I felt my face getting hot, and I had this tight feeling in my chest. I knew she was waiting for me to say something, but I didn't know what to say. I think she took my silence as me being open to the idea because she kept going. She started talking about how we all need to pitch in, and it's what families do for each other. She even threw in how much Ryan and Emma could use the help since Ryan took a gap year and is now applying to colleges too. I finally snapped out of it and just told her, no. Straight up, no. I told her that I wasn't going to share my college fund with them because it wasn't meant for them. It was my dad's money, and he set it up for me, not anyone else. And honestly, why should I? We aren't close, and they've never made me feel like part of the family anyway. She didn't take that well at all. Her face went from this calm, I'm being reasonable look to pure anger in like 2 seconds. She called me selfish and said I wasn't thinking about the family. I was expecting this reaction, but it still stung. She's my mom, And here she was, acting like I was some villain just because I wanted to keep the one thing my dad left me. I told her I was fine with being selfish. I told her I had no problem admitting it because, at the end of the day, that money was for me and me alone. If Ryan really wanted to go to college so bad, he could take out loans like every other kid who doesn't have a fund set up for them. I knew it sounded harsh, but I was done playing nice. That's when she really lost it. She started yelling, and not just the regular kind of yelling. This was full-on rage. She was going off about how ungrateful I was, how I didn't appreciate everything she and my stepdad had done for me. She said that if my dad could see me now, he'd be so disappointed. That one hit hard, but I wasn't going to back down. I just sat there and let her yell because I knew arguing wasn't going to get me anywhere. I tried to explain that it wasn't about being ungrateful, that it was about respecting my dad's wishes and taking care of myself. I mean, this fund was my ticket out of a situation where I felt like an outsider for years. But she wasn't hearing it. She was too worked up, saying stuff like, "You think you're better than them, don't you?" And "You only care about yourself." It took everything in me not to yell back. I was so frustrated. It's like, how could she not get that I needed this for my own future? She's supposed to be my mom, my biggest supporter. And here she was, making me out to be the bad guy because I wouldn't give up what was mine. And what really sucked was that she kept using the whole family thing as her main argument. Like, where was this family unity when they were all treating me like a stranger in my own home? I told her that yelling at me wasn't going to change anything. I said, "Look, you can yell all you want, but it's not going to make me feel bad about this." And honestly, it wasn't even about the money anymore. It was the principle of it all. How could she expect me to give up something so important for people who never treated me like one of them? She eventually stopped yelling, and we just stared at each other. I could see she was trying to figure out what to say next, but I wasn't going to give her the chance. I stood up and told her that if this was the hill she wanted to die on, then fine. I wasn't budging, and she wasn't going to guilt trip me into changing my mind. Then she said something that really threw me. She told me that if I didn't change my mind in a week, she'd have no choice but to kick me out. I remember just standing there, blinking, because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was really threatening to throw me out over this? She said that since my birthday was coming up, and I'd be turning 18, she wouldn't be legally obligated to keep me anymore. So if I didn't share the fund, I'd be on my own. That's when it hit me. My own mom was willing to kick me out for these people. She was willing to throw her only kid out just to keep the peace with her new family. It was like a punch to the gut. I felt my eyes start to sting, but I wasn't about to cry in front of her. I told her, "Fine, if that's how you feel, I'll figure it out." I think she expected me to beg or plead with her, but I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. I walked out of the room and went straight to my own. I was so angry and hurt that I could barely think straight. I just kept replaying the conversation in my head, wondering how things got so messed up. I spent the rest of the night texting my friends, telling them what happened. I didn't really know what else to do. I felt trapped, like I had no options. But one of my friends was actually super helpful. She told me that if it came down to it, I could crash with her for a while. Another friend said they knew someone who was also looking for a roommate for college, so we could maybe room together when the time came. It felt like the walls were closing in, but at least I had some people who cared. At least I wasn't completely alone. But it still hurt, knowing my mom would choose them over me. It felt like everything I thought I knew about her was wrong, and now I was stuck figuring out how to move forward when my whole world was upside down. After that blow up with my mom, things got tense. Like really tense. It felt like I was walking on eggshells every single day. Every time I walked into a room, the vibe just shifted. My mom didn't say much to me, but when she did, it was with this cold, almost robotic tone. I guess she was trying to make me feel bad or guilty, but by then, I was too angry to even care. A few days went by, and it was like I was invisible in my own house. My mom would talk to my stepdad and my step-siblings like everything was normal, like nothing had happened. They'd laugh and talk about their plans for the weekend, school stuff, and whatever else. And me? I'd sit there eating my cereal, pretending not to care. But it was impossible to ignore how they just acted like I wasn't even there. I guess I had gotten used to feeling like an outsider, but now it was different. It felt like they were all actively ignoring me, like they were all in on it together. I spent most of my time in my room trying to come up with a plan. My birthday was coming up fast and the clock was ticking. I knew that as soon as I turned 18, my mom could legally kick me out. And judging by how she'd been acting, she had every intention of following through with that threat. I started packing up my stuff a little at a time, trying to prepare for whatever came next. It felt surreal, packing my life into boxes while the people downstairs carried on like nothing was happening. One night, my mom finally confronted me again. She knocked on my door, and when I opened it, she just stood there with her arms crossed, looking tired and annoyed. "Have you thought about what I said?" she asked, like she was already expecting me to give her the answer she wanted. I told her, "Yeah, I've thought about it, and I'm not changing my mind." The look she gave me was pure disbelief, like she couldn't believe I was actually standing my ground. But what did she expect? This was the only thing I had left from my dad, and I wasn't about to give it up just to make her and her new family happy. She sighed and did that thing where she rubs her forehead like she's got a headache, which was her classic "I'm so stressed" move. She said, "If you're really going to be this stubborn, then you leave me no choice." She didn't yell this time. She was calm, and somehow that made it worse. She told me I had 1 week. 1 week to change my mind or find somewhere else to live. "This isn't a threat, it's just how it has to be," she said, like she was being the reasonable one. I felt my stomach drop. Hearing her say it so calmly, so matter-of-fact, made it all too real. I just nodded because honestly, what was I supposed to say? I wasn't going to beg, and I definitely wasn't going to change my mind. I knew she had made up her mind too, and there was no going back. We were at a stalemate, and neither of us was going to back down. After she left my room, I just sat there for a while, trying to process everything. I felt like my world was crumbling, but at the same time, I was just numb. It's weird when you've been so angry for so long that you just stop feeling anything. It was like I was watching everything happen to someone else, not me. That's when I decided I needed to get out, no matter what. If my own mom was willing to kick me out over this, then it was clear I couldn't stay there any longer. I reached out to a few friends, telling them the whole story. It was embarrassing to admit what was going on, but I didn't have any other options. I needed a place to stay, at least until college started. Thankfully, my friends were amazing. One of my best friends, Sarah, said I could stay with her for as long as I needed. Her mom even offered to help me figure out a plan. It was a relief knowing I had somewhere to go, but it was also a reality check. This was really happening. I was going to be kicked out by my own mom, and there was no going back. The next few days were a blur. I started packing the rest of my stuff, boxing up my clothes, books, and whatever else I could fit. I felt like I was racing against the clock. But at the same time, there was this weird sense of freedom. Like, yeah, it sucked that I was being forced out, but at least I had control over where I was going next. I could finally be done with pretending to be part of a family that didn't want me. During this time, my stepdad and step-siblings were completely silent. They knew what was happening. My mom must have told them. But they didn't say a word to me. It's like they were all just waiting for me to disappear. I guess they were hoping I'd leave quietly, without making a scene. Part of me wanted to say something, to call them out for how they'd treated me all these years. But what was the point? It wouldn't change anything. They'd still go on pretending like I never existed. One morning I was packing up my books when my mom walked in. She stood there, watching me for a moment before saying, "You know, you're making this harder than it has to be." I just kept packing. I didn't even look at her because I knew if I did, I might lose my cool. She went on, talking about how it was heartbreaking to see me throw my life away over something as small as money. That really pissed me off. Small? This was everything my dad had left me. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her how messed up it was that she was choosing them over me, but I knew it wouldn't matter. So I just said, "This isn't about money, and you know it." She rolled her eyes like I was being dramatic. "Fine, if that's how you want to see it. But you're making a mistake, and one day you'll regret this." And with that, she walked out. I felt this wave of anger and sadness hit me all at once. It was like everything I'd held back for years finally broke through, but instead of breaking down, I just kept packing. I wasn't going to let her see how much it hurt. She'd already shown me where her priorities were, and there was no point in pretending things would ever be different. I had to take care of myself because clearly, no one else was going to do it for me. The day before my birthday, I had all my stuff packed and ready to go. Sarah and her mom came over to help me move everything out. It felt weird, like I was running away, but at the same time, it was a relief. I knew that leaving was the only way I was ever going to be free from all this. My mom didn't even come out to say goodbye when we left. I remember looking back at the house one last time, half expecting her to show up at the door, but she never did. It was just empty. And in that moment, I realized that leaving wasn't the end of the world. It was a new start. I had my friends, my plans for college, and my own future ahead of me. And even though it hurt, I knew it was better than staying in a place where I was never truly welcome. So I left, packed my stuff, walked out of the house, and moved in with my friend Sarah and her family. It was weird, you know. I felt this huge mix of emotions, part relief, part sadness, and a whole lot of anger. But mostly I just felt tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of feeling like I had to prove my worth in my own house. Tired of everything. But at the same time, leaving felt like the right choice, even if it hurt like hell. Sarah's family was awesome. They didn't make me feel like a burden or like I was some kind of charity case. They welcomed me, no questions asked. Her mom gave me this big hug when I showed up, and honestly, it was the first time in a while that I felt like someone actually cared. I'm not usually the hugging type, but I think I needed it more than I realized. Living there was a huge change. It felt like everything was moving in fast forward. I had to get used to not having my own space, sharing a room with Sarah, and getting back into a normal routine. I mean, I'd just been kicked out of my own house, so I had to adjust to a whole new life. But as crazy as it sounds, it was kind of freeing too. I didn't have to walk on eggshells anymore or feel like I was the odd one out. I could just exist. The weirdest part was how quiet things got with my mom. For the first couple of days after I left, I didn't hear anything from her. No calls, no texts, nothing. It was like I'd vanished off her radar. Part of me was relieved, but another part of me kept checking my phone, half hoping she'd say something. Anything. I know it's stupid, but I guess I was still holding on to the hope that she'd reach out, apologize, and say she didn't mean it. But she didn't. I kept telling myself it was better this way. At least she wasn't yelling at me or trying to guilt trip me anymore. But as the days went by, it just felt like proof that she didn't care. She really chose them over me, and now that I was gone, she didn't even bother to check if I was okay. But then, about a week after I'd moved out, I finally got a message. I saw her name pop up on my phone and my stomach did this weird flip. For a second, I thought maybe she was reaching out to make things right, but nope. She sent this long text about how I needed to come back and get the rest of my stuff, or she'd throw it all out. There was no, "How are you?" or "I'm sorry." Just business. Just cold. I replied and told her I'd pick up my stuff, but I didn't need her to be there when I did. I didn't want another fight, and I definitely didn't want to see her if all she was going to do was lecture me about how selfish I was. She said that was fine and told me she'd leave my things in the garage for me to grab. When I showed up to get my stuff, the house felt different. It's hard to explain, but it felt emptier, colder. My things were all crammed into these cheap trash bags like I was nothing more than a bunch of junk she was throwing out. I had to hold back tears as I dragged the bags into Sarah's car. It was one of those moments where everything just hits you all at once, like, wow, this is really my life now. But the real gut punch came when I found out that she'd already given my room to Emma. I noticed it when I walked by and saw her stuff spread out across the bed that used to be mine. She was redecorating it, putting up new posters and everything. It was like I'd been erased, like I never even existed there. I didn't say anything to her, and she didn't say anything to me. She just glanced up, saw me, and went right back to what she was doing. I walked out of that house feeling more alone than ever, but at the same time, I felt this weird sense of closure. It was like, okay, this is it. This is what it is now. They've moved on, and so should I. Back at Sarah's place, I dumped the bags in the corner of the room and sat there for a while, just staring at them. I couldn't bring myself to unpack. It felt like unpacking meant accepting everything that had happened, and I wasn't ready for that yet. But Sarah, being the amazing friend she is, didn't push me. She just sat with me, talked about random stuff to get my mind off it, and eventually convinced me to grab some takeout with her. Over the next few days, things got a bit better. I started to settle into a routine again, and Sarah's family made me feel like I belonged. Her mom even helped me start looking for part-time jobs so I could save up for when I eventually moved out on my own. It felt good to have people who were actually on my side. But the drama wasn't quite over. One day, my mom showed up at Sarah's house. I was in the middle of studying when Sarah's mom called me downstairs. The moment I saw my mom standing there, I knew it wasn't going to be good. She had this look on her face, like she was determined but also angry. She demanded to talk to me, and before I could even respond, she started going off about the post I made on social media. I had vented about everything, how she kicked me out, how I felt like I was never really part of the family. It got a lot of attention, and apparently some of her friends had seen it. She was furious. "You need to take that down," she shouted. "You're making me look bad, and it's not fair." I felt my blood boil. "Fair?" I shot back. "You kicked me out, remember? You chose them over me, and now you're mad because people know?" She didn't want to hear it. She kept going on about how I was making things worse for her, and how it was my fault she was losing friends over this. She even had the nerve to say I was being immature and dramatic for posting it. By then, I was done. I told her I wasn't taking anything down and that she needed to leave. Sarah's mom backed me up, telling her that if she kept yelling, she'd call the police. My mom stormed off, but not before saying, "You'll regret this one day. When they're all gone and you have no one left, don't come crawling back to me." That one hurt, but I stood my ground. I watched her leave, and even though it felt like a knife twisting in my chest, I knew I had to let her go. I couldn't keep chasing after someone who didn't want me around. It took me a while to calm down after that. I was shaking, and my mind was racing with everything she'd said. But Sarah and her mom were there, reminding me that I didn't need people like that in my life. I had real support, real friends who had my back. In the end, leaving my mom's house was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but it was also the best choice I could have made. It forced me to face the reality of my situation and start building my own life, away from all the negativity. And while it's still tough and there are moments when I miss the idea of a real family, I know now that sometimes the family you choose is the one that really counts.